Dr. Shabir, welcome to Let the Quran Speak.
Pleasure to be on.
Now, let's talk about the rituals of Hajj, because I think that they, and you think, that they tell us something about the way we can think about Islamic law and understand Islamic law, and also think about how to maybe improve the way we think about Islamic law.
Yes.
So tell me about some of the rituals that, you've done studies because you're going on Hajj. So you've looked at the rituals in greater detail, and you've realized that there's some flexibility in the way we think about the rituals. So tell me about that a little bit.
Yes. In anything, like if we want to know what does Islam say about a certain thing, we want to know what does the Quran specifically say about it. So is this really from God? Did God say it? What did the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, say or do about this? Is this based on what he said or did? Or is it the interpretation of some great scholar in the past? We want to know, like, what's the basis of this law or ritual? And with Hajj, we have a sequence of events and sequence of rituals. We want to know about each one, like what does the Quran say? What did the Prophet, peace be upon him, do? Or what did he say about this? And when we look at this in detail, we see the way in which Islamic law came to be established and the way in which it can actually change if we will allow it to. So a lot of people just think that, okay, everything we're doing has been done for such a long time in the same way. It must be done that way, and you cannot change it. But when we go back to the classical sources, we look at the Quran in detail, we look at the life example of the Prophet, peace be upon him, we see that some things are indeed changeable. It's just that nobody wanted to change it, and for good reasons. Like, we're glad that things were left as they are, because now we can see it, just like we preserve historical artifacts, for example. The only difficulty with preserving these as though they were historical artifacts is that we don't expect to keep them as historical artifacts in museums. We expect them to be in the life of the community, which is growing and changing and dynamically responding to changing circumstances and new environments. So we cannot keep everything as historical artifacts forever. We have to go back and see, okay, how did it get to be preserved like that? How did it fossilize? And is it possible to chip away at some of the fossilization and bring out the original core and spirit so that we can have that applied in a new and dynamic way?
Well, this is the thing. When you actually investigate further, you realize that there's some confusion or there's some discrepancy in the way that the Hajj was reported.
Yes, and more
the
to my
Prophet's
point,
Hajj, the Prophet Muhammad's Hajj.
More to my point is that we would expect that the Hajj, as we're doing it now, must be done exactly the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, did it. But a lot of what we are doing and told to do is based on the way in which scholars have interpreted the life experience of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. And that too is based on reports about what the Prophet, peace be upon him, said and did. And the reports are varied one from another. So let me give a quick example of this. Ibn Rushd is a great scholar from Cordova. He was a philosopher and also a master faqih, or a jurist. He wrote a massive book entitled Bidayatul Mujtahid, a jurist's primer, which has now been translated into English in 2 large volumes. Now, in that book, he mentions that the reports about the Hajj of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, vary such that some say he did this one type of Hajj, some say he did this other type of Hajj. And there are 3 different types of Hajj which are mentioned in our classical books, and one has to choose which one one is going to perform. So
what do you mean, which type? Is it? Are they varied so significantly that you could call them 3 different types?
Well, they're called 3 different types, and one has to decide which type one is encountering or endeavoring to perform. And they vary only in some slight details, but of course there are significant details, and such that one has to decide. You cannot just say, I don't know which Hajj I'm performing, because each one has specific stipulations, though, of course, there are certain major components which are common to all of them. So, tawaf, circumambulation of the Kaaba, sa'i, walking between the 2 hills of Safa and Marwa, donning the ihram, staying at Arafah and at Mina, and at Muzdalifah and so on. All of these major components are common to the three, but the exact sequences of things, whether you take the ihram off between Umrah and Hajj, whether you do Umrah and Hajj together, and so on, all of these are varied components. And it's important then that you know which one you're going to do. But the reports vary between saying the Prophet, peace be upon him, did it this way, or that he did it this other way.
So why do you think that's significant then?
Well, it's significant in that we should know that not everything that is reported about the Prophet's actions are like 100% the way he did it, because it couldn't have been done two ways. Sometimes people try to amalgamate varied reports by saying maybe he did it this way once and he did it this other way the other time, and people just remembered and reported what they remembered. So some people remembered the time when he did it this way, and some people remembered the time when he did it this way. And so both reports must be correct. But here we have an example where clearly all the reports cannot be correct, because it is mentioned that he only performed the Hajj once since he had migrated to Medina. So that means all the reports about how he performed the Hajj could only be about the one occasion. And if the reports are differing one from another, it's because people could not remember clearly. And that's fine. That's the nature of things. After the death of the Prophet, peace be upon him, people could not remember certain details clearly enough. They remembered the main components. And that's why the main components are part of any type of Hajj, but they could not remember the details of, or some of the details of what the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, said and did about the Hajj, and this is why we have the varied reports. Now, when we extrapolate from this and we think more broadly, we realize that the same phenomenon governs almost every aspect of Islam, whether we're talking about the prayers, the fasting, the zakat, charity, that is, all the aspects of Islam are like this, that the reports coalesce on certain major components of these practices, but they differ on some of the minor aspects. And this is why you have 4 different schools of Islamic jurisprudence that are popular among the Muslims of the world. This is why you have varied fatwas or Islamic verdicts from one scholar to another on almost every aspect of the Islamic faith.
I understand that in some of the reports the Prophet Muhammad told the people around him, I'm doing it this way, but maybe this wasn't the best way, or maybe there was another way of doing it.
Yes, and that
I'm paraphrasing, I don't know.
Yes, this is another aspect that I think is important for us to highlight. It is reported that the Prophet, peace be upon him, marched from Medina, his town, back to Mecca to perform the pilgrimage, and he had the animals to offer in sacrifice, marching along with him. And there were some of his companions who did not have their sacrificial animals with them. Now, when he arrived in Medina, in Mecca, to perform the rituals, I spoke about the ihram, or donning the ihram, or entering into that state of sanctity. Now, one type of Hajj is such that once you come there with your animals to sacrifice, you are not allowed to get out of the state of sanctity until after the sacrifice is completed. So if you have arrived there way ahead of time, then you're going to remain in that state of sanctity until the sacrificial day, which is the day corresponding to Eid for Muslims around the world. So you could be in that state of sanctity for 10 days, 20 days, a whole month, depending on when you arrive, how early you arrive in Mecca. Now, the way out of that, because it's hard to maintain that state of sanctity with all of its rules and regulations, so the way out, and the simple way for Muslims, is that you don't come with your sacrificial animals. You intend to perform a few rites, which just take a couple of hours when you arrive in Mecca, and then you get out of that state of sanctity. Now you can enjoy normal life, you can go shopping if you want, and you can have normal relations with your spouse and so on during that period, waiting for the Hajj to begin, which will start just 2 days before the Eid. And then you will be in that state of sanctity from that day onwards for another 5 days or so. Well, actually, not even for another 5 days. On the day of Eid itself, you will be out of that state. So you're looking at 3 days max. And that is simple, and that's how most Muslims perform it today. Because to do it the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, reportedly did it would be too exhausting for Muslims to maintain, and difficult, and it's fraught with difficulties. So, now, the reports say that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, though he did it that way, he wished he had done it the other way. And he said that had he known what what he's experienced now, he wouldn't have brought his sacrificial animals with him. So if he were to do it all over again, he would do it the way Muslims are commonly doing it now. So that's great. We're doing it the way the Prophet, peace be upon him, wished he would have done it. And he told some of his companions at the time to do it that way because they didn't have the sacrificial animals with them. This shows that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, himself was growing with experience, and that there are some things he might have done which he would have perhaps wished he could have done it a different way if the circumstances were different, or if he had known differently. So the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, is guided by God according to our belief, and so he's doing things to teach us. But that level of guidance, that we know that in every communication there is a communicator, and there is the recipient, and then there's the communication itself. So somewhere between the communicator and the recipient, the part of the message could be obscured. And so, like, I say something, you're listening, and I'm putting it into words, hoping that I'll get my idea into your mind. But somewhere in that process, my idea may not exactly be reflected in your mind. You may hear what I'm saying, and you may think something differently than what I actually mean. This is why people are always saying, no, I didn't mean that. Or no, don't take me the wrong way. Because you realize that your message may not actually get across, and the idea in your mind may not actually translate. So there is an idea, let's say, in the mind of God, and it has to now translate into the mind of the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him. There's a communication between God and his Prophet. So the Prophet, peace be upon him, is guided, but don't expect that, he is God himself. He is a human being still, and he is growing and learning with experience. So what this means for me is that we must look carefully at the things that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, did, and don't take it for granted that because he did it that way, that means it must be like this for all time, because he himself, had he experienced a different circumstance, might have rethought some of the things that he did. Now, it's hard to imagine that he would have rethought some of the basic rituals of Islam, like the prayer and the fasting and so on, except, of course, when we go to northern regions where the day is so long. But in normal circumstances that are similar to his own, it's hard to imagine he would have rethought any of this. But when the circumstances are very different, one has to ask, do you think that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would have done the same thing he did in this new circumstance? And it's important to ask that question, because to follow the Prophet, peace be upon him, is not only to ask what did he do, but to ask what would he have done had he been here, right here and now.
We'll leave it at that. Thank you for those very interesting insights. I appreciate it, Dr. Shabir Ally.
You're welcome.